What's good, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguised Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. That is One Pipe Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes or description below on whatever app or platform you are listening to or watching this podcast on. In tonight's episode of Disguised Coverage, we will be diving into the biggest Buffalo Bills question marks for the 2023 season. It could be player specific. It could be position group specific. It could be coaching specific. It could be schematic. It could be anything and or everything, micro, macro, on any level, in any semblance, shape, or form. And I said we because I'm not alone on that journey tonight in this episode. I do this type of episode, this exercise, if you will, every single year. It's one of the episodes I really look forward to. And to go on that journey and on that ride in this episode tonight, I am joined by Mr. Joe Marino, host of Locked on Bills. And I mean, a lot of other works, a lot of other passion projects, a lot of other pieces. You know, you're the author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run. And then you also host the Locked on NFL Scouting podcast. And you're CPR certified? I don't know any other accolades you want me to throw out there.
CPR certified, yeah, and I've learned how to use an AED. But no, most importantly, I'm your guest tonight. Honored to be here. Excited to get into the subject matter with you. Always enjoy our conversations, Anthony.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Even though you say horribly nasty things to me when we're offline. So
yeah, I didn't feel like that was appropriate to bring up right there. I'll save that stuff. Yeah.
See, and that's cool. Like, just bash me behind closed doors, but then praise me out in the limelight, and I appreciate that. You're smart. You get it. You understand how this whole thing works. Joe, you and I were talking a bit offline in terms of, you know, before we went live here, how we kind of started to put our list together and how it went. And you are someone who, your exercise every year that you've included me in for the past couple of years, and a lot of other Bills and the Bills content creators in the community, with that exercise of like the 10 most important players for the upcoming season. And you have specific definitions and criteria that you let us know and kind of how we craft our lists and put them together. It's a really tremendous exercise. So I'm excited to have you on for this exercise. And I want to know from you, again, we were talking about it a bit offline. How did you find this exercise and putting together, you know, the biggest question marks for the Bills in 2023? Did you find it challenging? Did you start with a bucket of questions and then whittle it down? You know, kind of what was your process like as you put this together?
Well, I started with plenty of things that I can bring up, and I don't know that means that I'm concerned that the Bills won't be a very good football team. I just think that I'm a very critical person that spends a lot of time analyzing this roster and the decisions that they make, and it leads me to a number of outcomes, and there's things that I don't necessarily feel super settled with. And so I was able to come up with quite a bit. But what helped me was lasering in on three, right? I knew that we had three things that we wanted to bring up each tonight. And knowing that it was only three and not 10, I was able to laser down on the three and really ask myself the question, like, what are you really most concerned about? And once I did that, I was able to eliminate a lot and really settle in on my three.
We were talking offline. I knew what I wanted really as my one, and I kind of started from there. And I thought this was going to be cake. Again, you know, I've had a same, I shouldn't say same, but a similar amount of concerns, both in terms of what they were and amount, really this entire offseason. And they've ebbed and flowed a bit in terms of how I rank them or define them. And I really thought this would be easier for me than it was. And I don't know if it's my OCD or just my desire to be very particular with things, which is probably tied to the OCD piece. I don't know. But I really was like, no, this is two. Like, one was good for me, but I was like, this should be two. No, this should be three. And then I had other buckets. I was like, does this one creep into three? No, that's more of a four. And then I was like, but I just need three. And I was like, yeah, but it's still important to know that this one's four. I did a lot of wrestling and jostling with my list. Like, it's a good thing I typed it all out, because if it was handwritten, I'd have a lot of scribbles and it would look like a serial killer wrote it. But I'm excited to be here on this journey with you. And what do you think? Should we dive right into it?
I'm ready, man.
All right. So for those who don't know, as we dive into the meat and crux of the episode here, myself and Mr. Joe Marino are going to be detailing the biggest Buffalo Bills question marks for 2023. And as I said in the intro, it could be micro level, it could be macro level, it could be player specific, it could be a position group, an entire side of the ball, a coach, a schematic piece, a personnel grouping. It could be anything and everything. That's part of why I enjoy doing this episode with someone, especially someone of your caliber, because it just, do we overlap? Do we have different perspectives? What are you focusing in on? I love how you mentioned, I know you see the game both from the Bills side of it and from an evaluation piece holistically and player level with what you do from a college ball perspective, like the critical lens in which you see the game. And I think I see the game through a similar critical lens. So it's cool to see, do we align? Are we seeing different pieces critically? And how did all those things stack up? For those of you playing at home and joining us live tonight in the chat, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, ideologies, theorems, maxims, philosophies, your own biggest question marks, what you think of our question marks as we go through, throw them up into the chat. I will bring up as many things as I physically possibly can. Super chats, as always, get priority. One, because I respect the monetary donation. Two, I see the color and it attracts my eyes and brings me away from what's going on. Joe and I are going to start. So we each have 3. So we're going to go from 3 to 2 to 1. Joe, you are the guest, and I am nothing if not a gracious host. So why don't you hit us with your third biggest question mark for the Buffalo Bills in 2023?
All right, so at number 3 for me, I have middle linebacker. Tremaine Edmonds, after 5 seasons as Matt Milano's running mate, is no more. And the Bills are turning to a cast of characters that include the possibility of Dorian Williams, a rookie out of Tulane, Terrell Bernard, second-year player out of Baylor, Tyrell Dotson, been on the team since 2019, and I really think that's the list, right? Bale Inspector, I think your depth player, A.J. Klein, has been brought in to be an asset to the room, as Brandon Beane told us, right? He's not really in this mix. So you have those 3 players. And I'll give a spoiler right now. This is the only position battle that I have written down. I know the Bills have some outstanding roster starting jobs available, potentially at right guard and cornerback too. But the difference between the right guard stuff and the cornerback stuff versus middle linebacker is I actually like the contenders at guard and at cornerback. All right. So I'm confident that they have a starting caliber or player or 2 at corner or right guard. I'm not sure they have one at middle linebacker. And you hear everybody, whether it's Sean McDermott or Brandon Beane or Bobby Babich or Micah Hyde, say the most important thing that this middle linebacker does is they communicate and they make sure that the defense is on the same page. And you heard Micah Hyde say, if that guy's wrong, we're all wrong, right? And so this is a big job. So not only do you have to play well, you have to communicate. And none of these guys have any significant amount of experience doing this. And so there's a big piece of me that I don't know if fear is the word, but I'm going to go with fear. I fear that Tyrell Dotson's going to win this job. And the reason why I fear that is because the Bills, and I think this is quite clear if you look at their history, they like what they're familiar with. And the feather in Tyrell Dotson's hat is that he's been around since 2019. And the team stuck with him through some pretty challenging personal stuff. But his time on task, to steal a McDermott phrase, is greater than greater than Bernard or Williams. And I feel like there's a good chance that it's his job to lose. Now, where Dotson probably gives you something intriguing is I think he might be the best downhill player of those 3 based on the sample sizes of film that I've watched both in college and the pros. But I think he's probably the most limited in terms of athleticism and coverage, which is really what you probably want the most out of that position, especially when you do have a good D tackle situation, especially with like Daquan Jones and Poona Ford and what they can be as run stoppers. And even Ed Oliver, I think, is a good run stopper. Greg Rousseau, like you've got run stuffers up front. So you feel like you can work with Williams or Bernard and really be excited about their range and what they can give you in coverage and as a matchup player. But I just feel like at the end of the day, the Bills are going to say to themselves, Tyrell Dotson's been here since 2019, and we just have the most level of comfort with him. And so while I'm leaning into Tyrell Dotson right now, any one of the 3 would concern me for different reasons. And, Sean McDermott's taking over as this play caller for the defense, and he's doing so with this. And I don't know, man, I just have a level of concern about it. It's not higher on my list because I am mindful of the position, right? And that they do have really good things around this linebacker, both from Matt Milano and the back 7 collectively, and of course what you have with the front. Like that all gives me a lot of hope. You have great defensive coaching. but someone's got to get in there and execute and call this defense and execute. So, and I don't know that I love any one of these three options. I hope I'm wrong, but it gives me a lot of concern right now.
So I had two follow-up questions for you. You answered the one. First question of, who do you think could potentially win this job? You think there's a front runner, so potentially Dodson for you. Flip to the other side. Who would, again, I'm in a similar boat. Like, it's kind of like you're picking the least of all the evils. Who would you feel most comfortable with starting on day one? Who is the lesser of all the evils at the middle linebacker spot for you going into the season?
Might be Dorian Williams, because
okay.
I think he has the best combination of size and athleticism. And I think coming out of college, at least, I think he had the best resume. With Bernard, I like the athleticism. He's a guy that had injuries at Baylor. I don't like what concerns me about Terrell Bernard is I don't think that he naturally takes good angles, right? I worry about pursuit leverage with Terrell Bernard. I like if he can see ball, get ball, shoot a gap, make a play behind the line of scrimmage. Like, I think he can do that. He has athleticism. He just feels like a thinker out there when he has to be. And like, sometimes that's a bad combination in the NFL. Like, if you're a tardy processor and you have to read and react and you're a tick slow, that's hurtful, especially when you're a smaller linebacker. Like, if you get him you send him into the line of scrimmage, I like a lot of what Terrell Bernard can give you. But I think as a consistent player in terms of asking him to read and react, I have a level of concern about that. So I don't know, maybe it's just completely the devil you don't know. And that's what Dorian Williams is for me. I great concern about him being a rookie. I didn't love his tape at Tulane. But I guess because of the upside, I think he's got the best upside of any of the three. I find myself hoping, I guess, very smallly that it's him.
Yeah, it's a weird. I'm in a similar boat. Like, I like Dorian Williams' length and the speed and the burst, and then I wonder, like, okay, well, he and you see it on the tape, and Brandon Beane said as much initially in his first press conference before he and McDermott kind of walked back some of these comments. But the simplistic defense that he came from at Tulane, like, they ran a lot of just like spot drop kind of coverages, and it's like, okay, how does he? Now, this doesn't mean he can't pick these things up, but how does he adjust to more of like a match perspective in terms of who he has to carry and who he has to pick up? And you see it sparingly on tape. There are 3 off the top of my head in like the 6 games I watched, or 5, where, he carries a tight end on a post all the way down the field, and he carries a slot receiver, but it's like, okay, how does he adjust to that consistently? How does he process? But you look at the physicality and the measurables, and it's like, oh, like, this could be fun. And then I see Bernard, I think about what Frazier said last year and how strong he is on the whiteboard and how smart he is and coming from Dave Aranda's system. And you mentioned a piece that I love about him. When he comes forward as like a blitzer, it's beautiful. He's either getting through the gap or he is demolishing someone on the way there. And then I think, okay, like, if we lean into some of the pieces that you and I talked about when we talked on your show about what this Bills defense could be potentially this year, the idea of, maybe there's a little change in the scheme or the calls, and they blitz the linebackers more and use more different fronts. And maybe Bernard's just this heat-seeking missile that goes through that piece. But I can't, despite his athleticism, I felt like at Baylor, and it showed up sometimes in the preseason, especially against the Colts, against their one backup tight end on a drag route. I just feel like and I don't know if it's because he's thinking too much or if he's just slow-footed, but there's times where I just feel like, man, like, he's moving in quicksand, and I feel like he shouldn't be moving in quicksand. And that worries me a little bit. And there's no right answer for anything. I don't want Dodson because I just have the Cleveland game last year sticking in my brain.
Detroit.
Detroit. And then in relation to what the defense looked like with Edmonds out against Minnesota, which I don't think is talked about enough. It completely night and day. And so then you're like, okay, like, you took this, and this could also be mitigated a lot by what Sean McDermott does. And some of this is related to one of the points in my list, so I'm going to save some of it. But maybe Sean McDermott can mitigate some of this by scheming around it if you have any deficiencies or vulnerabilities. And if the scheme changes, perhaps some of the athleticism that was heaped upon this position with Tremaine Edmonds, maybe it switches and changes a little bit. But it's a very scary thing knowing you're going from this hyper-athletic, intelligent guy to what you have now, no disrespect, you're missing out on some combination of the athleticism or intelligent guy at this point right now. And you have to figure out how to, okay, like which is the least of all these evils? Which hole are we most comfortable with in this player's skill set to place them in there? And just from an individual micro roster perspective on the defensive side of the ball, yeah, it's got to be the biggest question, because you also genuinely don't know what you have. Like if it's Dodson, if it's Bernard, if it's Williams, hell, they'll throw everybody in there. If it's Spector, if it's Klein, right? Like the only one with true sample size starting in the NFL is AJ Klein, but that sample size came when he was a much different player in his youth. So that's not even really relevant anymore. You don't know what you have. It's like a mystery box, but like kind of scary, because like you're like, oh, mystery box, it could be anything in there, but it's more like, no, it could be anything. And that's kind of scary. Yeah, your face says it all. Like, it's kind of scary. I like that point. I like it a lot. So again, that relates to, I didn't cheat, but I combined that with another point for point 2 for me. So I like where your head's at. My number 3, and I mean, my number 3 here is a bit of good and a bit of potentially bad from a question perspective, but I really lean into more of it from like a question mark of, because like what the potential and the possibilities could be. My number 3 is Ken Dorsey and what he does in year 2 as an offensive coordinator. Last year, I felt at the culmination of the year, I really felt 2 things with the Bills offense. I felt, and I don't think these are necessarily unique to me, some of them might be, but I thought Ken Dorsey had room to grow and improve as an OC. But I want to say this, and I've said it a bunch on the show, I do think he had a better year that he gets credit for. I don't know when in the year, but some like midway, maybe the 3/4 stretch, it seemed like he became the low-hanging fruit for any and every problem that the offense had at any point. Even when there's options underneath and Josh Allen's taking the Jeep shot, everybody's like, well, Dorsey's only calling verticals, and that wasn't happening. Conversation for another time, but he had room to improve and grow going into year 2. That was one of the things I felt. One of the other pieces from an offensive standpoint, I also felt the Bills could serve themselves well by differentiating and adding to their weaponry group and upgrading the offensive line. And you come into this offseason, I like what they've done with their weapons. I like the skill sets and how dynamic the weapon group is for the Bills: wide receivers, tight end, and running back. I like the Hardy piece. I like the Sherfield piece. Kincaid, you and I have talked about a lot. Did in an episode on your show. I like the Damian Harris piece as a compliment, even the Latavius Murray option. I like the new elements that are added to the offense from a skill set perspective and from a schematic potential perspective. I think the Bills offense now has the ability to threaten a defense in a multitude of ways, purely by either personnel or alignment or both, which is tremendously fun. Go to the offensive line. I think the offensive line got better overall. I think Connor McGovern fits well into this offensive line with his athleticism and his proficiency in pass protection. And no disrespect to Roger Saffold, I think he's a legitimate upgrade for Roger Saffold. My biggest thing with McGovern is, even if you think McGovern is like a B- or a B, that's a huge upgrade from like a C+ or a D- that Roger Saffold was frequently last year. Then you have the Osiris Torrance pick, who at the very least gives you more depth overall on the offensive line. And I do have questions about how he'll handle quickness and speed at this level, but I like the pick. I like the dynamic he adds. I like physical downhill football, and he's physical. He's a mauler. He's a people mover. He gives you that downhill element, which wasn't present before in this Bills offensive line, especially on the interior. Like, you've got guys like Bates and Morse and McGovern who are all like 305 pounds here, 307 pounds here. And then Osiris Torrance walks in at 330. He's not this dude you want out in space, like necessarily even climb into the second level at times. Like, you want him as that down blocker. You want him going downhill, whether it's duo or inside zone, and these pieces and what he offers from a strength and physical perspective. And if he wins that right guard spot, I also like that option, because then it means Ryan Bates is potentially a super sub for any spot on the interior of your offensive line, and maybe even tackle in a pinch. But that's more of a long shot. So now in year 2 for Ken Dorsey, for me, I think a big question mark is, how does he use what he now has at his disposal? I did not feel on offense last year, from a talent perspective or from a skill set dynamic perspective, that the Bills had the quality needed at the end of the year when you looked at who the final 4 teams were in the conference championships last year. I think the Bills have remedied that a bit this offseason, which means more options for Ken Dorsey to succeed, more fun, more variety, more multiplicity, all of these pieces, but also more potential blame that could fall on his shoulders if he isn't able to improve and or succeed, given what he now has holistically at his disposal. When you look at the entire wide receiver core, the tight end room, the running backs, the offensive line. And then I also have an overall question of just what in general the offense will look like, personnel usage, snap shares, and also how much do they run the ball and what kind of scheme do they use to run the ball. I think the Bills offense has the potential to be one of the most varied offenses in the NFL, with the ability to win in the pass and the run, and to do so with a variety of schemes and dimensions. And I know it's a passing league and the Bills have Josh Allen, but I think between the legs of Josh Allen, the running back room they have, the O-line they have, and then Coach Aaron Kromer, I think this could be one of the best from an efficiency standpoint run games in the league, and something the Bills could really lean into. That was one of my biggest criticisms for Dorsey down the stretch. I felt like he could have leaned even more into that run game. It started to really click, and it seemed like he just didn't stick with it enough. So that's my number 3.
I have some follow-up points there, but it would take away from something I have coming here in a minute. So I think it's a very valid concern, and one that I'll expand upon when I get an opportunity here coming up.
I like it. You'll see when I go into my 2, I wrestled very much with 2 and 3 and trying to figure out what was what. So I like it. All right. Now we move on to number 2 in this list. Again, for those of you just joining us, biggest Buffalo Bills question marks for 2023, myself and Joe Marino. We started with our number 3s. Now we're going on to number 2. Joe, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, number 2 for me, and I feel pretty good about this. Like, this is what's different about – this is why it's 2 and not 3. It's Spencer Brown at right tackle.
Oh, okay.
And, man, nothing – well, I won't say nothing. Few things could mean more to the Bills' success in 2023 than Spencer Brown realizing his ceiling at right tackle. And Spencer is supremely gifted in terms of size, athleticism. He's got it all. And I say this a lot, but I'm not being hyperbolic when I say Spencer Brown's probably the best athlete on the Bills team and one of the better athletes in the entire NFL when you consider size and athleticism. And he's had a bumpy start to his career. But I think when you understand the context, you can appreciate and feel like it's pretty valid that he has been up and down to this point where, you know, he grows up in small town USA, 8-man high school football where he plays tight end. He goes to Northern Iowa. He plays offensive tackle for 2 seasons. That's it. 2 seasons of offensive tackle at Northern Iowa. Doesn't have a 2020 campaign at all. His last year at Northern Iowa was canceled. So he's not playing football at all in a huge year for development. Still goes to the NFL, and he's a 3rd-round pick by the Bills. And at week 4, he becomes the Bills' starting right tackle. And he elevated the Bills' offensive line in 2021. He legitimately did. Now, while he was still shaky, he elevated the unit, especially the run blocking. And he gets injured, right? He has a back problem. And he spends the entire offseason between 2021 and 2022 rehabbing a back injury, so much so that it was questionable whether he was going to be ready to go to start the season. He had very few practice reps to start his 2nd season. And he winds up like starting week 1 against the Rams. And I thought he was really shaky for most of the season. I thought he played better football later. But like I mentioned, like there's just been a tough stretch for him to start his career. It's hard to believe that anybody could come in and play good football under those circumstances. And now he has the opportunity to play a season where he's had a normal offseason for the first time in a long time and prepared to be the Bills' starting right tackle. And I just feel like there's a lot of momentum here. He's supremely gifted. He's been through a share of ups and downs already in his career. And his growth is so big for this football team. We're talking about the offensive tackle, starting offensive tackle for Josh Allen, right? You want to talk about the offensive line getting better. Spencer Brown playing better would be huge.
Yeah.
And so it's not like I like that you're phrasing this as a question mark, because you could say concern, and that's fine. It is a concern, but to me, it's a question mark. But it's something that I think, as the pendulum swings on yes, he does play good football, or no, he's still inconsistent. Where that lands is going to mean a lot for the success of the offense and, Josh Allen in 2023.
I'm very torn on what to say next because of. I'll just go into it and have a big conversation. So Spencer Brown is my number one.
Okay.
And this is the cool part of the conversation, right? Like and I recognize the ceiling piece, and I love that you touched on that. The reason he's my one and the biggest question mark isn't because of the ceiling piece. For me, it's what the floor is. What is Spencer Brown's floor? Run blocking, like you talked about. I love the run blocking piece, and it's really fun to see him succeed there. Like when he run blocks, whether it's in or around the box or out in space, you really see him be able to tap into that athleticism and the physicality and the length and the size. Like it's a fun thing to watch him pull or get out in space or climb to the second level. He's physical, he's nasty, he's quick, he's fluid, he's smooth. Pass protection is extremely shaky. And he's my biggest question. He was one of my biggest questions last year. And for me, again, it's the same question for him this year. What does his floor look like? And last year's floor was rough. Especially from a pass protection standpoint, a super mercurial player, a roller coaster that you do not want to be on. And to your point, and something I mentioned on the show, the injury concerns everything. You hit on it. 8-man football, Northern Iowa, no 2020, comes into the league, was just supposed to, simmer and cook and learn the game. And it's like, nope, pretty much quarter mark of the year. You got to go in and learn right away. And you got to learn, you got to learn how to play right tackle on the job in the NFL for a team that has championship aspirations. And then you go into the next year, and exactly your point, he's not really getting training camp reps. He's not getting off-season reps. He's not getting preseason reps. And for a position group in the offensive line, chemistry is so important from a checks and knowledge standpoint, even just to the little things of what it's like to work a double team with the man next to you and for you to each feel like, okay, who's going to pull off when and understand how they move and how they step. Like you need to have that chemistry piece. He didn't get any of that. And then when he does play, he's playing banged up for a majority of the year. What still worries me with that is, again, I know he was banged up, which definitely impacted his play. But for me, it just muddies the waters even further because it's not like we can say, well, he was hurt last year, but when healthy, guy's been a stud or he's been solid, because overall he hasn't, which to your point, again, and like I've said on the show, it's understandable given the timeline and trajectory that he's been on as a player. But his floor for me is a vulnerability. The ceiling is super fun, and I do think he's good as a run blocker. Again, you see all those fun pieces. He's legit in that aspect, but as a pass protector, he's inconsistent and a liability at times. One of my favorite things in evaluating college tape and college offensive linemen, I love a good snatch trap. Darnell Wright from Tennessee this past year had a really beautiful one. It's rare when you see an offensive lineman get snatch trapped by a defensive lineman. And I've seen that happen to Spencer Brown. He gets so far out in front of his feet, they chop his hands and he falls forward and guys are just beating him around the yard quick. And exactly to your point, for a team with a top tier QB, a top tier wide receiver, a new dynamic and complement of weapons overall, and I think overall an above average offensive line from left tackle to right guard, Spencer Brown sticks out in a tremendous way. The advanced metrics were reported last year of 88 tackles with at least 20% of pass protection snaps in 2022. Spencer Brown was tied for 69th out of those 88 tackles in pass block efficiency. Of the 206 offensive linemen total, not just tackles, with at least 20% of pass pro snaps, he was tied for 180th in pass block efficiency in true pass sets and 70th amongst the 88 tackles. True pass sets are 4 or more rushers, no play actions, no screens, no short dropbacks, and 2 or more seconds time to throw. And if you're looking for volume, he was tied for the 8th most pressures allowed in 2022 amongst all offensive linemen and tied for the 5th most amongst all tackles. I like the ceiling. I'm still excited. I'm not completely down or out on him, but exactly to your point, again, you said it, like you have one of the best players in the entire league and one of the best quarterbacks in Josh Allen. And if you have a vulnerability at a key premium spot, it really shifts to what it shifts what you can do and what you can get to. And it concerns me greatly. And that's why it's my one. Granted, echoing a lot of your similar sentiments.
So we got a great spoiler for your number one. We just kind of did the thing there. Let me make a statement, and then can I take you into the spin cycle for a little bit?
Sure.
Because this might be one of my biggest stretches ever, but I'm curious to put it on your plate and see what you think.
I saw you queuing stuff up as I was speaking, and I was like, he's got something good coming up. I'm excited for it.
Well, okay. So the first thing and what I was queuing up was you mentioned one of your big concerns is not so much the ceiling, it's the floor with Spencer Brown. I tell you that I think you got your answer. I think his floor is what we've watched so far in the NFL. I'm hopeful, right, that he's played as bad a football as he ever will in his career, right?
Yeah.
So, while that's true, the Bills have still had a top 3 offense in both seasons with him as a starting right tackle, right?
Very
so, the Bills have become, I don't want to use the wrong word here, but they've become accustomed to navigating around his inconsistent play, right? That's been a standard in this top 3 offense that we've watched over the last 2 years.
Fair.
You ready for the spin cycle?
I like it. Yeah, do it.
And I fully acknowledge this can be a stretch. Everybody knows Josh Allen rolling to his right is lethal, right? And you probably listened to Josh on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, right? And they kind of talked about this a little bit. He said, look, I still get right, though. I still get right. And here's the spin, Anthony. Is there some benefit for him? Like, when you're going up against Spencer Brown as a pass rusher right now, you're probably pretty excited about that opportunity, right? And maybe you're not being as disciplined. You're kind of selling out a little bit. And maybe that's exactly what you want if you're Josh Allen. Come on, baby.
Okay.
Come beat this right tackle, because I'm going to get outside of you.
Right out the front door.
Yeah, like you're just not going to – you're like, if I'm a pass rusher and I'm going against Spencer Brown, and I'm a good NFL pass rusher, so I cannot relate with any of this, but I'm just putting myself into that mindset. I'm going to be very reluctant to contain rush because I feel like I could beat this guy. I'm going to sell out. I'm going to try to beat his ass, and I'm going to try to get to Josh Allen. And that's exactly what Josh Allen would like for me to do. So there's my spin, and maybe it's a major stretch, and I've never thought about it until this moment.
I think that's fair, though. Like, I think that's a fair point. My worry with that is, are we staying in that spot where we're asking so much of Josh Allen to get to that point?
That's a great response.
Like, yes. And that was one of my biggest, tying it to a Ken Dorsey piece as well. I felt like even when the offense was really clicking last year, a lot of it was still like, hey, Josh, go do something. Hey, Josh is a unicorn, so I'm just going to have Josh be a unicorn. And it was like, every once in a while, give him some easy buttons or let him just survey things from the pocket and find, give me some semblance of an easy button, whether in protection.
Josh has got to take the easy button too. And I'm glad you said it, man. Like, like he's just ignoring very easy throws and he just doesn't take them.
Yes.
What game was it, dude? The last two games.
I got one off the top of my head.
It was a check down throw, I think, to Q Morris. Maybe against Chicago. It was a check down throw to Q Morris. He caught the ball and turned it up the field, ran it for 11 yards. Might have been Gilliam. Actually, might have been Gilliam. It was one of those two players.
I think it was Morris. I think you're right.
It was one of those two players. I know it was. And I thought to myself, my God, I've never wanted to see that completion more in my life. He took it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think of the end of 2021 in New England when the division is kind of up for grabs. And I'm just picturing Donta Hightower and Bentley dropping deep in cover 2. And he's just like, I'm just going to check it down to Devin Singletary. And he's going to run for 15 because there's no one around him. And then I juxtapose it with the playoff game against Miami, and they're up 17-0. It's first and 10 at the 50. And he's got Singletary, who I believe it's play action. Singletary releases and he curls up over Morse. There's no one around him. And you're up 17 and you're at the 50. All he has to do is check it down. And legitimately, even if Singletary just catches it and turns and gets tackled right away, it's a gain of 5. But there's space. He could easily get the first down. Instead, he chucks it deep for no reason, gets picked by Xavier Howard, and Howard returns it. Miami starts to generate some momentum. I love that point, and I feel like I keep getting into this conversation. I don't want to because it makes me seem like this giant Ken Dorsey apologist, and I'm not. But I do think there's so many things that he's calling all these deep shots. He's calling all these deep shots. There's other routes that are being run. Josh is not taking them. He is going for the throat. And he does that with everything. When the same thing that clicks in Josh Allen's brain when he gains 8 yards on 1st and 10 and sees a linebacker, the thing that clicks in his brain that goes, I'm going to truck that guy to get another 1 or 2 yards. It's the same thing that goes in his brain of like, oh, a crosser. Nah, deep shot. And he chucks it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that's the yin and yang. It's the same thing when we're playing against Miami on that Saturday night at the end of the first half. And he wastes all that time, but he finds James Cook for the touchdown. That was a horrible decision. You cost the team 3 points minimum if it's an incompletion. But guess what? He got a TD out of it. And everybody's going to think, wow, what an amazing play. That was not the smart play, but that's Josh Allen. That's the yin and the yang. He's a risk-reward type of guy. And yes, there are other pieces. I love that. Dorsey's not out there just calling 4 verts on every play. There's progressions. There's layers. Granted, he could do some more in terms of making the route concepts merge more with one another instead of having it just be like split field reads and certain coverage beaters and the pieces together there. But yeah, and I want more easiness for Josh Allen from a Ken Dorsey perspective. And I also want it from the player perspective. And I don't think it was too crazy of a stretch with your Spencer Brown piece. I think there could be some legitimacy to that. Invite the upfield rush, because guess what happens? If Josh Allen gets outside, it's chaos creation, and that's where Allen thrives. But what worries me is it's another piece of having to be like, it's fine, Josh will correct for it. It's fine, Josh will take care of it. And it's like, man, I don't want to have to rely on him to do that. But I don't think it was too much of a stretch.
Well, so here's a little bit of like I wouldn't call it a counterpoint, but just another thing to introduce to based off the stuff that you said there. And I really do agree with what you said. I really do. Offenses, and you hear this from defenses, right? Defenses want to limit explosives, right? Mm-hmm. If you get a play on a drive that's 20 plus yards or more, your chances of scoring on that drive goes up 3 times, right? Mm-hmm. It's surely, I mean, yeah, Josh is an aggressive quarterback, but that's got to be part of the thought process, right? If we can get these explosives, defenses are trying to not let you get explosives because they're keenly aware of that. They'd rather make you be patient. And I think threading the needle between being patient and also being aggressive is very, very hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's funny though, is I felt like Josh kind of had it figured out in the middle of the season.
Yes.
So like, that's where it's like, well, is it
and
really
he had it
just
figured out at the end of 2021? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know what, I don't know.
Be consistent with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a very fair point. Like, it just all of a sudden, I don't know if it was, and it's funny too, like you mentioned the torque thing. And I started to wonder, like, with the elbow injury, maybe he can't throw short and intermediate, and maybe it helps him to feel like he can just cock back a little and go deep and it doesn't hurt the elbow. And maybe that's why he's pushing it a little more. Like, it could be like one of life's little mysteries like that. I think it's because
his really average time to throw an average depth of target post week 9, it's changed drastically. Well, exactly. What happened? Well, the throwing elbow, and then you listen to Kyle Trimble's analysis on the torque required for shorter throws versus the longer throws and accuracy. It's like, all right, that sounds good to me. I'll buy.
Yeah, and the difference of what he was doing on the left side versus the right side, and you kind of, if you want to connect those puzzle pieces and put those breadcrumbs together, you're like, oh, there's some legitimacy there. Yeah. Ooh, fun. Oh, wait, so then I guess this means I need to go with my number 2 then.
Yeah, you've done your one. It feels like you did your number 1.
I did my 1. All right, cool. So now I'll go.
So your number 1 is Spencer Brown. Your number 3 was it
Ken Dorsey and the Bills offense. Yeah.
So now here we are with your 2.
Here we are 2. Jumped around. That's what happens with the overlap. It's fun and exciting. I like it. So this ties a little bit into your number 3, which was the Bills linebacker position. My number 2 overall is the Bills defensive front, D-line plus linebackers. I'm going to start with the D-line, which I really, really like. But feels like every year the Bills defensive line has been a focal point and or talking point for the offseason for this team, either in the draft, in free agency, or both. Last year, the group really fizzled out once Von Miller went down. Metrics went down. The metrics speak to it. The tape speaks to it. It was very much less than ideal. This year, they add Poona Ford, who I like from a versatility perspective. I've said it a bunch. Like, I just wasn't prepared. When I went back and watched the Seattle tape, I just wasn't prepared for the variety of fronts that the Seahawks used and how Poona Ford functioned in there. Like, he's at 1 tech, he's at a 0, he's at a shade, he's at a 3 tech, he's at a 4-eye, he's at a 5. Like, I just wasn't.
Did you hear Pete Carroll's comments on that? Like,
No,
after the season, yeah, he commented on it. He says, yeah, we did wrong by Poona. He lives in the A gaps. He's like, that's his home, and we put too much on him, asking him to play in some of those wider alignments. They came out and literally candidly said it. Yes.
That's super cool. Nice plug. Nice pull.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's awesome. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, you see him succeed in there, and I'm all for versatility and differentiation, but yeah, like plug him in the A gap, put him in the interior, which I think is where he's going to live with the Bills. I like that addition. I really like the Leonard Floyd addition just from a competent, proven edge rusher, which I think you need if and or when Von Miller misses time. And even when he comes back, at worst, he's the third or second man with Von and Groot, which you can never have too much pass rush. So I like that piece. They add Poona Ford, they add Leonard Floyd, they extend Ed Oliver, and they return the majority of last year's defensive line. But within all of that, I still have questions. And so it's kind of like good. And because if these questions are answered, they're phenomenal. But, can Jordan Phillips stay healthy? Can Ed Oliver stay healthy and reduce his inconsistency? How healthy is Von Miller? What does year 3 Greg Rousseau look like? Does he take a jump, and how much? Year 4 AJ Epinesa, I thought he played better down the stretch last year that he gets credit for. Does he take a jump, and how much? Year 3 Boogie Basham, who I've never been high on, does he take a jump, and how much? What do we get from Floyd and Ford? What does the rotation look like? The defensive line is so tremendously important in general versus the run game, but especially when you play nickel or use light boxes, or even more so when you play nickel with light boxes like the Bills do. In 2022, the Bills' top 3 defensive personnel groups all had 5 DBs. Majority of that is nickel. A total of 94% of their packages on defense had 5 DBs. Again, the heavy majority of that is nickel. And then they had 56%. They were rolling with a 56% light box rate, which is the 7th most in the league. From a pass rush perspective, it's self-explanatory. Can you get to the QB and how often? But the Bills like to, and again, this may shift a little bit depending on what McDermott does, but the Bills traditionally have liked to have numbers in coverage. They want to rush 4. If they can get you with 4, that's what they want to do. Drop 7, 2 high looks, single high looks, disguise coverage, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, change the pre to post snap picture, all the shells and everything that they're doing. They like to have those numbers in coverage. You can't have that if you can't get pressure with 4. And then also tying it into one of the episodes we did together, you and I talked about a lot of the fun possibilities of what the Bills could do schematically on defense under Sean McDermott this year. The varied fronts, the simulated pressures, the sub packages, all of those pieces. Those things become less fun and also easier to scheme against when you're doing them because you have to. When you have to use a simulated pressure to generate pressure because your front can't get there with 4, that's a worrisome thing. And we've seen that ebb and flow over the past several years. Von Miller was supposed to be the cure-all. He gets banged up. Everybody kind of, again, fizzles out, I think, slowly fades away. Then tying that into the rest of the front, which is the linebackers, whoever starts opposite of Milano, we had a bit of this conversation earlier, there's already legitimate concern of how much does it impact the coverages they play and the usage rates of those coverages. But then you're adding in the other piece, okay, how clean do they have to be kept? How are they used? How much is Tremaine Edmonds truly missed? And do the Bills move on from Tremaine Edmonds because someone steps up, or because Sean McDermott schemes around those deficiencies like we mentioned, or because the defensive line is so strong that kind of whoever you put in there, you can just let them, be clean? I would love, with Dorian Williams' burst and athleticism, I would love the idea of the Bills front is so nasty that Williams is just clean all the time and you can just let him buzz and fly and do whatever he wants. And then you're pairing that with Matt Milano, who loves to shoot gaps and cause havoc and just is a dog around the line of scrimmage. That's also a fun, possibility. And so I have the question around the Bills front, again, the defensive line plus the linebackers, not necessarily from like a negative perspective of like I'm worried or concerned about them, but it's a question mark because if they hit where we think they could hit, this defense with what we know what the secondary in theory should be. But man, if you pair it together with a truly nasty and diverse front and protected front with that secondary, and with an offense that can score and tends to get out in front, and now you've got a defensive front that can just attack and go hunt against QBs and just penetrate and cause havoc. It's a fun possibility, but then there also is that little bit of the negative kind of question mark of another year, another conversation about this group. We more additions, more hope in some degrees, but also I think some more semblance of consistency. I think this is probably the strongest in terms of overall depth and variety they've had on the defensive line under Sean McDermott. I feel good about it, but it's still a question mark for me because of how important it is to this defense and what we've seen in years prior.
I'm optimistic. I really am.
Same.
I mean, it's basically all of them are back plus Poona Ford and Leonard Floyd. Right? Like that's what you've done.
Yeah.
And you like to think that within the everyone being back, that there's a lot of growth from some of the young players. And man, I'm Greg Rousseau year 3. I can't wait, dude. You and Eric did such a good job with him on that that episode. I've watched it. I've recommended it like 2 or 3 times on Locked On Bills.
Yeah.
So good. But man, like what I gained such an appreciation from Rousseau in that conversation was just how much of a student of the game he was.
Yes.
Just like, dude, his recall, how important like every moment was and how he was playing off guys and just what he was keying pre-snap, man, that was incredible. So thank you for bringing that to us.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And just to plug that real quick, like you know, with like guys being in the NFL, like how obviously like physically gifted they are, but it's just so impressive when you see somebody who can truly articulate the game. Yep. And he, to your point, he articulated everything. He was like, oh, like I step with this foot because I knew this. I watched the tackle do this. So I hit him here and I moved here and I grabbed him, you know, with his set this way. I'm trying to aim for the numbers on the inside of his chest. And this is where I want to grab the breastplate. And I want to do that because X, Y, like everything, just what a football IQ on him. And then you pair it together with the length and the size and the athleticism. And it's like, uh-oh, like imagine what, like, look how smart he is. And he's just, in theory, should continue to get better. Yeah, I was truly blown away by what and who he was between the ears and just how smart, because you never really know unless you can sit and talk with him. And yeah, right. he was phenomenal.
The Poona Ford quote, I pulled it up. Here it is from Pete Carroll after the season. This is on Poona Ford coming out of 2022. Carroll said, quote, "He played a ton of football. We probably overplayed him. We would have liked him to rotate more. I really like him playing over the center, playing nose tackle. It's kind of his home base. Played a lot of 3 technique and 5 technique for us, which was pushing him to a spot that he is not familiar with, but he busted his tail. He's really instinctive always, but I think we wore him down quite a bit because we just had him play too much."
Oh, that's tremendously transparent and insightful from people.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile quote. That's why I pulled it up there. So.
Absolutely. Well done. Well done with that quote. Whew. All right. Anything on my number 2? No? Ready to go to your number 1?
I'm ready to go to my number 1.
I like it.
And this is something that we've talked a lot about already, so I want to hit it from a different angle. So it's Ken Dorsey. But the angle that I want to hit it from isn't so much like he has to be a better play caller or he has to be more aligned with Josh Allen, situational stuff. Like, no, that's not what I want to focus in on. I just feel like Ken Dorsey, and maybe I'm not sure I'll fully agree with myself here, but maybe if Brian Daboll still was the offensive coordinator, I could talk myself into agreeing with this. But the job ahead for Ken Dorsey to incorporate a lot at his disposal, I think is what's going to be really challenging. And it's a big question mark for me. It's just a loaded group. I mean, you got Steph Diggs and his 150 plus targets, but then you have other good receivers. You know, Gabriel Davis is going to get his. Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy. Where does Khalil Shakir factor into this mix? You're going to incorporate 12 personnel. That's not happened in Buffalo, right? That's a completely new layer to the offense that we've never seen before. And so you have to install that and do it with a rookie and, you know, get your quarterback to probably reprogram himself in some ways, because the way that the target distribution has went over the last 3 years has been wide receiver heavy, like really, really heavy, and with very little production throwing the football to tight ends and running backs. But you sort of feel like the personnel moves suggest that they want him to do that. So I just think that not only does he have a lot of work to do in terms of developing his counter punch and evolving things in year 2, but doing so with a huge new personnel grouping and 12 personnel that, again, we haven't seen before, but also incorporating a lot of worthy options. And look, there's no way that everyone's going to be relevant, right? Like Shakir, Sherfield, Hardy, Knox, Davis, Kincaid, running backs that you want to throw the football to in Kincaid or in Cook, in Hines. Like, They're not all going to be meaningful players for this offense, but they all have a chance to be. And Ken Dorsey's got to like sort through this, and I'm sure he's already started working on that, obviously, but training camp will present a very great opportunity to sort it out and figure it out and really like, who are your guys, right? Like, how does this sort out? And it's going to be fascinating to see unfold. And obviously doing so with, potentially, at least one new starter on your offensive line. But I just feel like he's got a big job ahead of him. And I think one thing that we don't talk enough about with Ken Dorsey in year one are the things that perhaps he was counting on being true that just weren't true, and it's not his fault. It's not his fault. It's not his fault that OJ Howard stinks and that the 12 personnel packages that they were trying to develop didn't happen. It's not his fault that Zach Moss wasn't the RB2 that they thought he was going to be, and they had to make some switches there and lean into James Cook more and then trade for Nyheim Hines. It's not his fault that Josh Allen hurt his throwing elbow in week 9 against the Jets and didn't practice for like weeks after and had reduced practice reps while trying to onboard a new player in Nyheim Hines. It's not his fault that Roger Saffold was a complete disaster at left guard and Spencer Brown didn't take the step we all hoped for in year 2, right? There's just a lot of things, not to mention Jamison Crowder, his injury and what you probably thought he was getting. You lost 2 veterans at receiver in Kumaro and Crowder early in the season. Like, that's a lot to figure out. Oh, by the way, it's your first year doing this. You know what I mean? Like, can you give him a little grace? Like, there was people concerned early in the season that Ken Dorsey was going to be one and done as the OC and be someone's head coach right now.
They finished second in DVOA last year offensively. And even when they struggled down the stretch, they were 7th or 8th when they were like, when everybody was like, oh God, he's awful. It's like, yeah, they finished top 10 still.
So I say all that to say that he's got a big job to do.
Yes.
He's got a big job to do. And I think incorporating these skill sets in the best possible way for this offense, like, should be fun. I mean, that's got to be a dream, right? To figure that out with Josh Allen as your quarterback, with a lot of, you got 5 guys on your offensive coaching staff that have been OCs in the league. Collaborate and get this thing figured out, because there's so much potential for this offense. And I don't, like you said earlier, like, I think you can look at last year's group and say, man, I just don't know if they have the talent. It's Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, maybe a couple of good offensive linemen, and then, we'll see. I don't feel that way right now. I feel like they have a lot of opportunity to piece this together and be a really dynamic offense. And so doing that and that actually happening is my biggest question mark, because I think if it becomes what it can, it's going to be really fun.
Yeah. And I think that I like that we had some overlap with our top 3 overall, but really, and it's funny too, like, I think we said a lot of the same things or similar pieces for the Ken Dorsey piece, but just having it ranked differently. And the perspective you have with it is something, I wanted to emphasize as well. Because you can almost have, like, when you have so many options, I feel like there is a small chance where it can be like kind of overwhelming. Because it's like, well, yeah, who do I get the ball to? Like, what do I do here? Like, there's so many having so many options. Then you kind of have, what is it, the paralysis by analysis type thing, where you're trying to do so much and incorporate so many pieces that, you get overwhelmed, or to your point, it's just not feasible. And then it's like, okay, who do you lean into? And then does he lean into the right people? Because exactly to your point and what we talked about, there's a lot of fun dynamics, like with what Sherfield can do with his speed and size and frame and his ability as a power slot to function in the run game. The 12 personnel piece with Kincaid, like you talked about, and we talked about in your show, like it would be a new incorporation, but all the possibilities there. And then Deontay Hardy, who his speed and electricity, but route running that he adds on top of it as well. And then you have the run game. And then you're even functioning in the offensive line, because if Osiris Torrance wins that job, okay, do you lean into more gap scheme stuff? Like, are you going to stick with all that zone running you did with Cook? Because, zone running has a little more athleticism and more movement to it. Not that Torrance can't do it, but again, this is the dude you want to lean into, that people movement capability. So are you leaning into more pin and pull and counter and power and all these pieces? And what are you truly doing? Do you get more downhill? Do you pair that with the play action game and tie it in and attack vertically? Like, there's all these domino pieces that all start from the dynamics they have on this offense. And I think it's it's a good problem to have, like the old adage says, right? Like you've got all these fun options, and it's a good group. It's a strong group. I really think it is. I don't think that's any, well, because we cover this team and yada yada. Like they've got variety, and it's not just variety for the sake of variety or having like, yeah, they got a bunch of guys who can do different stuff, but it's so what, that stuff sucks. Like, no, it's all valuable pieces. And then they have strengths they can lean into, but other avenues they can also be used in. A lot of fun potential and possibilities. And again, that's why I think like this year for me, and I think for a lot of people more so than last year, is like, okay, man, the cupboard is pretty stocked. You got to make a good meal out of this. And if you can't, again, understood, but then maybe, you're not meant to cook us this meal. And that can be a little scary.
Well, we started this conversation with talking about our methodology and how we took a bunch of stuff and got it down to like the most important things, right? I think Ken Dorsey has to look at this very similarly. Like you got a lot of stuff to figure out. Well, what's the most important thing? And I think two things come to mind. Number one, any good coach knows this. Players, not plays, right? Players, not plays. And I think that feeds into number two for me, which is, okay, you're playing Team X. What is the best way to attack Team X, and which of these players has the trait necessary to best attack Team X? And you ask yourself those questions and you figure it out from there.
Yeah, I love it. And that ties into one of my favorite things I say on the show all the time. It's rock, paper, scissors. And when you're playing rock, paper, scissors, the best way to win is to be able to throw rock, be able to throw paper, and be able to throw scissors. And you can go into 1 week, oh, it's a rock week this week. What does that mean? Heavy Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis game. Oh, next week's a paper week. What does that mean? They're a horrible run defense. We're leaning into James Cook and the run game. We'll mix in some play action and attack them that way. Like whatever you need to be, that's what a team's identity ideally is. Like Bruce Lee, and you be fluid and like water and do whatever you need to. Your identity should be, and ideally is, whatever needs to be done to beat that opponent. It's not we're a passing offense. Oh, we're a run team. Nope. It's we're going to be whoever we need to be in order to beat you that week. Whatever personnel, whatever usage rates, whatever run to pass ratio, whatever area of the field we're attacking, it is designed to expand upon and attack the weaknesses of our opponent and mitigate their strengths at the same time. And what's super fun about what they have, you can do that. You have a rock, paper, scissors roster on the offensive side of the ball. You've got those dynamics and those skill sets. You just got to plug them in and do exactly. Oh, and I like this comment from Charles, who says, feels like Ann is describing the Pats. It was in the back of my head and I didn't want to say it. That was the hallmark of those Belichick and Brady teams. Like every week, especially defensively, but they changed who they were. And then offensively, that's why you never took a Patriots running back in fantasy, because every week Belichick would switch who it was because the game plan differed a little bit based on what he wanted to do, based on what was asked of that position. And it was based on what the defense was that week and how they wanted to attack them. And because how do you defend that? How do you defend an offense, especially when you're watching tape and you have a year's worth of film where it's just like, oh, dude, like they just kind of change what they think. There's core principles there, but they change what they do every week based on whatever the team's weaknesses. And then it's like, okay, well, what are our weaknesses? Are they going to attack our weaknesses? Okay, do we plan for that? Do they know we're planning for that? And they know what we think they know that we know. And then all of a sudden, it's just a lot of fun possibilities. And I'm excited for it. I'm excited for this conversation. This was fun. This was a good time, as I knew it would be. You're a very busy man, so I appreciate you taking the time to join me and just crushing it like you absolutely did. Again, like I knew you would. So thank you for joining me. And the floor is yours. Plug who you are, what you got, anything and everything, just in case people don't know. The floor is yours, Joe. Do with it as you wish.
As always, a great conversation talking football with you, Anthony. Really appreciate it. I'm Joe Marino, host of the Locked On Bills podcast. It's a daily podcast on the Buffalo Bills, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And then also have Locked On NFL Scouting, which is a podcast that I co-host along with Kyle Krabs, where we look at the entire NFL through the lens of team building and roster construction. And so if you're looking for more of my national perspective outside of the Bills, that's also a daily podcast that's free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And again, the name of that is Locked On NFL Scouting. That's what I do. 2 daily podcasts.
I appreciate you, Joe. Your content is A1, whether it's Bills content or the Locked On Scouting piece and the national perspective or anything and everything come draft time when it comes to prospect evaluation and fits and rankings and all of those pieces. Again, I respect the hell out of you. I appreciate you taking the time and joining me, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. I'm sure I'll see you around on Twitter or the DMs or whatever, and Godspeed, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Tremendous guest. Oh, hold on. Sorry. I just saw, oh, that's a nice comment there, Troy. Troy saying this was fun. Two super smart guys. I appreciate you, Troy. Thank you very much. Carl says, I gave my number one as the super chat earlier, and it all comes down to whether the players can stay healthy. I'm so sorry, Charles, that I missed your super chat. I'm so sorry. And I just brought it up now. I'm so sorry. Forgive me, Carl. That's on me. Thank you very much for being here, Carl. Thank you very much for the super chat. And thank you for commenting here to bring it back. Again, my sincerest apologies. I'm so sorry that I missed this. And again, thank you very much for being here and your generosity. Carl, you said the Bills were the second healthiest team in 2021 and 2022. In 2022 and 2023, they were decimated by injuries. Can they stay healthy this coming year? I actually like that comment a lot. Man, how much did we talk about these past couple of years about the Bills facilities and the training staff and the medical team, and how you just don't see injuries happen to this team? Like, you're not, and you would see some, right? They're like breaks and things that you can't necessarily control, but soft muscle injuries and soft tissue injuries, like you really didn't see that. And a lot of it was a testament to what McDermott and Beam believed in terms of workload management and how to properly practice guys and train guys, and then what the medical staff was doing and proper health and diet and routine and all of those things. And last year it was just, Spencer Brown starts it in the offseason. Saffold was banged up a bit in the offseason. And then we go into, week one, Ed Oliver gets banged up. Week two against Tennessee, Jordan Phillips hurts the hammy. Micah Hyde hurts his neck and is out for the year. Dane Jackson gets carted off in an ambulance against Tennessee, but then is eventually good to go. The next week against Miami, Benford goes down. Poyer gets hurt at a certain point multiple times with that elbow piece. Like, he got hurt in the offseason, then gets hurt again. Like, and it just carried on. Edmonds gets banged up during games, and Daquan Jones goes down in the most important point of the year, and Trey's coming back from injury, and Von Miller is hurt. And honestly, there's probably a multitude more that I'm not mentioning. But Carl, you're spot on. And I actually think this could be like one of the biggest question marks. Like, it's funny when you really look at it. Usually the best teams come the end of the season are in some way the healthiest, either in total volume and depth, or because their core guys and their top guys stayed healthy and didn't go down. And the Bills just got banged up overall, but especially to like their top tier dudes. And I think that could be a potentially big storyline and big question mark for the Bills this year, because is that like something that's starting to trend downward for this team? Is there good injury fortune and luck that they had those first couple of years, like you mentioned? Is that starting to turn a little bit? Are we seeing some, kind of cracks in the armor a little bit of how healthy they've been? And if so, again, that's worrisome and that's concerning. I think that's a very fair point, Carl, and I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Oh, and Steve echoes a similar thought, saying, I truly believe that health will be the biggest question that truly will control this team's destiny. Sometimes the biggest factor is out of your control. Ooh, Spin says, I think the health of our O-line will be the most important, as far as what group is more important as far as health is concerned. I think that's a fair point. I do like the depth on the offensive line this year, but you can never have too much offensive line depth. And from a tackle perspective, I am a little concerned. Like, the swing tackle for this team is, I don't know, is it Shell? Is it Quessenberry? Either way, no disrespect, it's not great. That's part of the reason why, I have those Spencer Brown concerns, because if your answer at right tackle isn't Spencer Brown, then who is the answer, or what is the answer? Because now you're getting into a world where now you're getting further down the chain in terms of athleticism. You're going further down the chain in terms of physicality and what you can do and what you can accomplish. And then it just becomes a little more scary, a little more worrisome, which is why it's even more important that Spencer Brown hits this year. It's like that. That's a fair point. Mm-hmm. Go to this comment here from Charles. Again, I wanted to start to bring up, I saw a lot of things you folks were bringing up in the chat. And so I had some that were marked or some that I saw and just wanted to scroll back and bring up some pieces. So if you are anybody still rolling here, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, what are your biggest Buffalo Bills question marks for 2023? Feel free to put them into the chat. Steve says, my number one question is, will the fact that McDermott is calling and running the defense take away from his ability to coach the game? That's a lot on his plate, and I'm sure it will be scrutinized this year. I think that's a fair point. I think you got to wonder that with everybody. Anytime a coach is fully involved on that side of the ball, whether it's Sean McVay, usually it's offensive guys, but, McVay or Andy Reid, these pieces of, how involved are these coaches? Yeah, because you have to be tapped in to what's going on in the overall game. You're still the head coach. You got to manage it, but then you're also managing a niche aspect of the game with that side of the ball. Can be, a little worrisome. Charles says McD calling the D is a good one. The Bills' overall D was good, but the red zone defense was bad. Way too many TDs allowed. I contemplated putting McDermott into my top 3 for this episode. A little peek behind the curtain for you folks, but I guess I just have more faith in him as a defensive coordinator because of the sample size, because of what he did in Philly, because of what he did in Carolina, because of what he's done, again, in his limited sample size here with the Bills when he did some play calling a bit in previous seasons, really like 2019, 18. I can't remember the years. I'm horrible with years and dates. So there was more sample size to it, which is why I didn't put it as a full, concern. It didn't crack my top 3, but it's up there. Like, I wonder, what does Sean McDermott, the defensive coordinator, look like? I have high hopes for it based on what he's done previously and based on how I think his type of coaching and defense, it is a bit different from Frazier's, different in the way that I think the defense needs to go. I mentioned it on last week's show. If you haven't checked that out, go and dive into that here on Disguise Coverage. But I think it's fair to have that be one of the questions there. Oh, J-Dub says, thanks, Ant. You and Joe are my favorite Bills fellows. That's awesome. Yeah, Joe is absolutely tremendous. Locked on Bills, locked on NFL scouting, the books he's written. He just does really top tier quality content almost anywhere and everywhere that he goes. So yeah, Joe is absolutely tremendous. I was pumped to have him on the show tonight. Lars says, one question that's not a word. One question mark for me is what level Von Miller will be as he returns from injury. That factors in, to my number 2 point there of, what the Bills front looks like. This is a guy who, despite the fact that he's in tremendous shape and he genuinely takes tremendous care of himself and the type of player that he is, allows him to, have opportunities at longevity. This is the second time he's torn that ACL. He is, well into his 30s at this point. I do think that's a bit of a concern. When Von Miller comes back, what type of Von Miller are you getting? Is it the Von Miller that showed up last year? Because that Von Miller was tremendous. Is it the Von Miller that came back from his ACL the first time, which was also tremendous? But again, this is, the second time. He's a bit older. And this was a group that, again, was significantly impacted positively and negatively by the presence and or absence of Von Miller. And I think that's why the additions of Floyd and Ford and the potential ascension of Greg Rousseau and even what Epinesa did in spurts last year, like, you just have more bodies that are able to, buttress the loss of Von Miller or the absence of Von Miller or any downticks in his performance because of what you now have on that front overall. And then I think McDermott's ability to kind of lean into certain pieces schematically, I think could mitigate any, lower level Von Miller effects. But I do think that's a fair question mark, because a lot of it is just like, man, like once Von comes back. But I don't know if we're having that conversation enough that is, kind of centered around like, yeah, but what kind of Von Miller is coming back? What does Von Miller look like when he comes through? So it'll be a very interesting piece. I like Tony the Chevy guy. He says, awesome show. Let's do it. Hit the like. Please, 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 and thank you. If you haven't already, likes are the lifeblood of these streams. They significantly impact the algorithm. So if you are enjoying this content, please and thank you. Drop a like on this video. It goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes. So if you're enjoying this, please, please, please drop a like on this video. I greatly appreciate it. David says, will Dorsey's game plans and play calling actually have purpose, or is he going to keep throwing darts at his play sheets? I don't think he's ever thrown darts at the play sheets. I understand your frustration, but I disagree with that kind of notion or idea of Ken Dorsey. But I feel and I understand where it comes from. Speaking of where it comes from, One Pie Pizza, sponsor of the show, is a gift that comes from the gods. It is absolutely tremendous. The best pizza in Buffalo, New York. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms you are listening to or watching this show on. Delicious sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese. They also do a ton of initiatives and drives for the community. So when you are getting yourself some one pie pizza, you're treating your taste buds and you're treating yourself and your family and friends and loved ones, but you're also doing some good for the community and giving back a little bit. So get yourself some one pie pizza. Tell them Disguise Coverage sent you. There's also a pizza that's named after the brand, the Cover One Allen Goat. It is absolutely delicious and tremendous. I don't even want to spoil what's in it. I got it last week along with a half sheet of cheese and pepperoni. It was tremendous. Go get yourself some one pie pizza. The best pizza in Buffalo, New York. You will not be disappointed. I guarantee it. Sincerely. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It is absolutely tremendous. And I think, folks, that'll do it for us here on this episode. As we start to wind down here, I want to thank Joe Marino for joining me on this episode. This is one of my favorite episodes to do every offseason, and he crushed it as I hoped he would and knew he would. So major thank you again to Joe Marino for joining me tonight. Thank you to all you folks who rode with us live in this episode, the questions, the thoughts, the comments, concerns. Carl, thank you very much for your super chat and for bringing it back to me when I didn't pull it up initially. Sincerely forgive me for that. I apologize. But thank you to everyone who rolled with us live. It's always awesome to see the chat and the engagement, the kind words for Joe, the kind words for myself and the brand. So thank you very much for that, folks. If you are listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, please rate and review and subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever have you. Those ratings and subscriptions and reviews are tremendously, tremendously helpful. If you're here on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel as well. Again, drop a like on this video if you'd be so kind. It goes a long way. And you know, whether you were here live, whether you're watching post live, anything and everything, whatever you're doing, your support is tremendously appreciated by myself and the entire team at Cover One. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. And if you thought the show was terrible, tell your enemies and try and ruin their day with this horrible show. Whatever floats your boat. At the end of the day, myself and again, the entire team, we appreciate your support in whatever form or fashion it comes in. So thank you very much in advance for any support that any of you give. And thank you very much currently for any support you have given. I don't know if I'm messing up timelines or things like that, but nonetheless, I'm going to start to get out of here. I appreciate the kind words that have come in throughout the show, again, for myself and Joe, and some more that are coming in now for myself. I'm glad you folks enjoyed the content. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, get at me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2_ANT, or feel free to leave a comment on the episode on YouTube. I will circle back and hit those things as well. Again, thank you very much. Thank you very much to my guest, Joe Marino. This has been another episode of Disguised Coverage. I will see you next week, live Tuesday, July 25th, 9 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of Disguised Coverage as we start to kick off Bills training camp, which begins next Wednesday, July 26th. Very exciting time. Training camp starts, and then before you know it, preseason's here, and then before you know it, the NFL regular season is here. So we got a lot of winding up to do as we start to cover the Bills and break down anything and everything you need to know from an X's and O's and schematic perspective here on this show. I'll see you next week, live Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, as always. For myself, for Joe Marino, my guest on tonight's episode, this has been another episode of Disguised Coverage. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. Look out for one another. I will see you next week. And as always, go Bills.